And welcome to the third module of McGill Academy, which is essentially a continuation of the previous one. So in the previous video, we pretty much touched on the basics of sketching. So more or less how to use the Smart Dimension tool and create a sketch and select different reference planes. Now, if you don't remember, you can start a new sketch always by pressing this button here. But what I'm going to do is augment what's left of our old rectangular prism, which was Bob. So for this example, I'm going to get rid of these lines here and implement the rectangle tool. So up there are all of your geometrical tools, if you'd call it. So that's how you're going to be drawing. Now, in addition to the Smart Dimensioning tool, we have access to additional tools that help with the aesthetic and functionality of a sketch. More or less for the former point, we have the sketch fillet tool up here. So when we click that, rather than having these pointed edges, as you can already see by the preview, it provides us with these rounded, smooth edges for our sketch. So once you accomplish the function, it does that. Now, this is the sketching version of filleting, but there's also one that you could use for futures. So if you look here, right there, your fillet tool. So don't think it's all done and over if you forget to do that in your sketch. Synonymous to that, we also have the chamfer tool. So rather than having it all rounded out as before, we have it sort of in a polygonal shape. Again, I use these tools quite a bit as they seriously help out with improving both the finish and characteristics of your sketch.
Now, while the fillet tool may be nice to use and it's pretty useful for finishing your products, it isn't necessarily the most useful tool out there. I'd award that honor to the Smart Dimension tool, which is what we're going to be working with here. So let's get rid of this rectangle and set up a right triangle like we had before. So 135 degrees right there. Set up another line that is hooked up to that. Boom. So it's a 45-degree angle between these two lines. That's already insinuated. So we'll put a dimension there. And I'm going to show you how not to use this tool. So say we want something that is 4 inches long. Boom. Now what I'm going to do is I am going to create this error. And if you may guess why, it's because of the fact that we tried to augment one more dimension than is possible. So by that I mean we already have a set hypotenuse of 4 inches. We already have an angle of 45 degrees. So changing this value by any extent will actually augment the trigonometric ratio that we already have in place here. So as a result, this prompt gives us two options. Make this dimension driven or leave it driving. So the difference between these two is the fact that for a driven variable, it's pretty much what the name insinuates. It's driven by the other variables. So it's dependent on what the other variables are. And that was pretty much the case from before. We don't really need this dimension to sort of insinuate the fact that this is 2.83 inches at the moment. However, driving...
All right, no stress here. And that's for dimensioning. So you really want to be careful when you're using the dimensioning tool, mostly because you can risk over-defining your sketch, which will cause a lot of headaches for you. Now, for more functional tools, we can use the Trim Entities tool. So say we have two rectangles that are overlapping like this. This particular shape will cause some issues, particularly if you want to extrude this model. And that's mostly because of this little overlap here, this little rectangle. So to get rid of that, we could use the Trim Entities tool. So the Trim Entities tool, if you hold down your mouse and rotate it, you can notice that it actually cuts away at anything it touches. So in this case, if I run it through here, it automatically detects what to cut out. And it's a very smart tool that saves you a lot of time, mostly in the sense that you don't actually have to create these two shapes from scratch without any measurements. You can make that overlap and then just cut away. So that's particularly useful, especially if you don't want to delete your sketches. Furthermore, sort of a relative to that, the opposite of that is the extend tool. So in both instances, you notice that the application actually detected where the nearest boundary was and either cut or extended the line to that particular boundary. Again, it's pretty useful, and I use the tool quite often. Okay, so I've cleaned up the sketch a little bit, got rid of those intermediate lines, and now I'm going to demonstrate the offset entities tool. You may be wondering, why did I skip the convert entities tool? And my rationale for that is it's particularly useful when you have a three-dimensional model. So you could sort of think of it as a way of projecting your sketch onto a different plane or an existing plane. So we're going to keep that in our back pocket, as well as the intersection curve feature here, and go to the offset tool. So the offset tool, as you can see by the picture, you'll already be able to guess what it does. So if you click any type of profile, so say we have our lines here, as you can see, it creates sort of an outline of what you had, and you can reverse the direction in any way you'd like. So this is particularly useful if you want to make, let's say, a nut or a bolt. You could just make two circles that share the same midpoint, but have different radii. So that's particularly useful as well. We also have the mirror entities tool. So both of these tools are lifesavers in the amount of work you can save. So you can already guess how this is going to work as well. So we select the profile. Say we have this profile here, and we mirror it about, as you can see in the picture, an axis. So we'll click this axis right here, that vertical line. And you can see, voila, we didn't have to redraw this left-hand model again. We just mirror it, and the same thing applies for features as well. So mirroring's cool and all that, but if you really want to get into more fancy things, start using the patterning tools. So we have the linear sketch pattern that we're going to start off with first. So what you could do is select a contour, and what this will do is, in a linear line, as the name implies, it'll create multiple instances of the same contour. So let's actually make this a 15-inch distance. And let's change the number of instances to 6. As you can see, we've created 6 versions of our contour. So this is particularly useful, especially if you want multiple of the same shape. You don't actually have to, sketch the whole thing from scratch. Furthermore, if you ever get stuck, just hover your mouse over each of these tabs and they'll tell you what each thing is responsible for. Furthermore, you could also change the angle at which you pattern. So this is at a 45-degree angle. We could make this at a 270-degree angle. It's really up to you. As well, we have the circular sketch pattern. So you'll be seeing both of these tools, but particularly the circular pattern, a lot when you're featuring, because that's how you create a lot of different mechanical designs, such as brake rotors. So it's the same case. You click your contour, and as you can see, it's created 4 instances of our contour in a circular fashion, as the name implies. The one thing about this particular tool I find a bit confusing is its wording. So particularly here when it says spacing, you think maybe that's the arc distance between each of these instances. But in reality, it's the spacing at which you want to occupy your circle. So it's the angle of circle, the amount of circle you want your circular pattern to occupy. To represent this visually, if we change this to 90, as you can see, it only occupies like a 90-degree quadrant of our sketch. So you'll have to play around with it a bit more. But the thing I like about SOLIDWORKS is the fact that it automatically updates the number of instances and the angle between each of these instances without having to do any calculations. This isn't true for applications like Siemens NX. Furthermore, we have the Move Entities tool. You'll have to be a bit more conscious when you're using this tool, particularly because of the fact that it can actually skew your models a little bit. So as you can see here, I've got the XY coordinate system. So X represented by the horizontal line, you can see down here, and Y represented by this vertical line. And as you can see, if I move this object, it actually stretches quite a bit. So if you ever want to use the Move Entities tool, I suggest you notice or acknowledge the fact that it could skew your models a bit. Furthermore, this From To option will let you choose starting points and end points for which to move your object. It pretty much accomplishes the same task. I'm going to touch a little bit about relations. So another way of viewing relations are, constraints of some form. So as you can see, these are the relations within this sketch. So we have numerous horizontal relations represented by these horizontal lines. Furthermore, we also have coincident relations and vertical relations, and so on and so forth. You get the idea. And the whole idea with these relations is if these are in place, your object is sort of rigid. It's sort of forced to follow these and ensure that these remain true. So say if we have this coincident relation here. So this is just between two different lines. This is sort of implying that these two lines cannot ever be adjacent to one another. So they always have to be touching. They always have to be intersecting. And to get rid of this relation, you can delete this relation. And pretty much what that'll allow you to do is, rather than having these two jointed together, you can move both of these lines quite freely. So that's something to play around with. If you notice, like in the previous case, your object is moving around or it isn't really acting in the right way, or you just want to change it up and you're sort of forced with these constraints. Relations are a good way to prevent that. Now, finally, I want to touch on a previous point I made, particularly when it comes to rebuilding your sketch and over-defining your sketch. So what I'm going to apply is a dimension here, and we'll put it as an angle dimension, an angular dimension. And you may be asking me, you're saying, Nima, that angle's already at 90 degrees. Why would we want to put another dimension in there? And sometimes we aren't thinking and we do so. And if I leave that driving, meaning everything else is dependent on this relationship, you'll notice these yellow lines appear. And what that indicates is the fact that your sketch is overdefined. Furthermore, if you want to exit your sketch, it'll give you this error, or if you want to, so if you edit your sketch and if you want to rebuild it, it'll give you the same error. So again, that's why you should be very careful, especially when it comes to using dimensions. You don't want to create problems like this for yourself because they are a pain to get rid of. So to do so, what we do is we enter our sketch and we simply delete that. And you notice if I rebuild this sketch, everything's hunky-dory. So that covers pretty much the entirety of sketching. As always, if you have any questions, make sure to refer to our Discord server or email us on our website. Thank you very much, and we'll hope to see you again.